We have a new guest who's joining us now. He is the community organizer of Kongamano la Mapinduzi, Mwalimu Mutemi Wakema. Happy tree planting day.
Happy Miti Day.
Thank you.
Well, Siti, Kompango, why don't you give Mwalimu the day's proverb?
Yes, and let's see what he makes of it.
Yes.
Our proverbs for the whole of this week come from DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. Okay?
Congo Kinshasa.
Well, I see you suffer the same.
King what?
King what?
King, you know what it is. Woe to the high-spirited bride whose mother-in-law is still alive.
Mwalimu?
Woe unto the high-spirited bride whose mother-in-law is still alive. So I think this mother-in-law thing has been, in the West, it's been overhyped. But I do think, Oedipus complex says a man's first love is his mother. So don't come and compete with my mother. Might not. It would be good for you to, if I've, my mother. Let's say I'm getting married in my 20s. And you've come from a certain space, you've come from a certain other family, and you've come into my family, it will be prudent for you to take time and study the environment before you can find your equilibrium in space. I guess that's what. Mpango, kuwa na mpango, and then try and win over the mother-in-law. Yeah, don't compete with her, because she knows your son.
Your husband.
Your husband. She has known.
She knows him better than you do.
Quite a lot of time. A long time. Yes.
Yes.
So don't start the wars.
Enough said. Tuseme kitu.
Usianze vita. From the word go.
Usikuja na ujuaji. Hii bomba iko na wenyewe.
Kuna karabati huko.
Bomba iko na wenyewe. All right. Mwalimu, we invited you here so we can talk, about our continent, Africa, and the leadership that we see in our continent, Africa. So first of all, were you in Makueni on Thursday?
No, unfortunately, I couldn't make it. But I wish I could have made it. Yes.
This was the launch of the Africa Leadership. What's it called?
Institute.
Pan-Africa Leadership Institute.
Yes.
Being spearheaded very much by Professor P.L.O. Lumumba. And the guest of honor was a firebrand, Julius Malema. He came there and he said very many things about leadership across the continent. He even touched on our leadership in our own country, and very many things that have been said. If you, from your perspective, looking at the leadership in Africa over the many years of Africa as an independent country, independent countries.
But country is good. It's good to.
Yes.
That's what we want.
Do you think we have had a majority of good visionary leadership, or is it a majority of leadership that is wanting?
So historically and contextually, we have to look at the state, the colonial state or colonial extractive state, and how it came to be, and what was there before. Just to delve into the CIC Malema's speech and the reactions. Part of it is that we are still a colonial extractive state. Kenya, Uganda, wherever, we are still colonial extractive states. These states were created for a specific purpose. And we got independence but never dismantled that state. And in that state, our forefathers, my grandfather and others, Africans, were culturalized and socialized not to ask questions or not to criticize the elders. So that's the reaction of, to CIC Malema's speech. And part of the quagmire we face as Kenyans and Africans, that And I think that's a struggle. Even I was looking at the comments when you're having your previous guests, and some people are quite scandalized that guy had the Mr. Kisi had the audacity to criticize the president, because we assume that once you get into a leadership space, you don't question. But the context is, we had colonial governments, and our previous leadership organized themselves. Our independence leaders, a lot of them, there were those who went to the forests, those, other spaces, lobbying spaces, organized themselves to gain independence for Africa. And they came together and they said, unless we unite our silos, our pockets, come together in a Pan-African movement, we cannot defeat this empire. And that's what led to the independence from around late 50s all the way to, I think, Zimbabwe, then South Sudan, I think the last one. But the British one was around 1980s when Zimbabwe finally got its independence. So that movement, those people came with a vision. They were very visionary, and they imagined, they said, we need a united Africa where people can move freely, goods can move freely, ideas can move freely. With one passport, borders, the visas that we see around, they wanted them out. Single currency, single military, and preferably a single, federal government. And they tried to push that agenda after independence. And I'm using independence in quotes because I don't think we are independent. We got what is called flag independence. And the visionary ones were taken out one way or the other. Nkrumah, who was among the leading lights at that time, was somewhere abroad when a military coup happened in Ghana, and Kotoka took over. We know about the Sankaras and the Lumumbas and others who all, were pushing that agenda of a united Africa. Same agenda that CSC Malema was pushing the other day. Same Malema, an organization I'm in the leadership of called Africans Rising, where I'm a co-chair, which is a movement of Pan-African movements, is campaigning for a borderless Africa. And we want Africans to imagine what it would be like if I wanted to eat fufu, to have it tomorrow in my door, and what it takes to do that. Right now, if you try to import anything from Nigeria, to be like pulling teeth, or to fly to Burkina Faso, you might have to fly to Europe, stay there for 2 days, and then
connect.
If you are lucky, you find a flight to Burkina Faso, because if it does not make business sense for you, most of the flights that fly there, they'll not go there. So, but you should be able to drive. But if you try to drive from here through Uganda, whatever, to Burkina Faso, it's going to be a hassle. So we had visionary leadership, but then somewhere along the way, today, when I look around, do I see any? Maybe one or two. Yeah.
So, if you look at the visions of people, look, people talk about them with a lot of controversy. But if you look at things that, the late Muammar Gaddafi spoke about, it lends to some of the things that you're speaking today. Things that he fought for with the original idea of the Organization for African Unity, and then said about how leadership with ideas needed to start from Africa, and they needed to have solutions that were for Africa. We had people, again, a lot of times the controversy surrounding some of these individuals now would say, well, because there's controversy, then why do we speak of it? The late President Moi spoke about African solutions for African problems. Again, the young ones of Kwame Nkrumah and who spoke about, look, we need to sort out the problems that we have for ourselves. We need to use our own resources to benefit us as Africans first. So there was a period of time where, folks like Thomas Sankara were speaking the same language. It didn't matter where you looked, north, south, east, west, around the continent. These words were spoken over and over again. Nelson Mandela, everywhere you looked, essentially. And it seemed to be the heartbeat of people across the continent, and it came in droves. And that's when you started hearing terms like Africa Rising and things like that. So where did we get to the point whereby we lost it? So much so that West Africa and East Africa, South Africa, Central Africa, that we cannot easily make a decision for one of the things that you talked about, like trade. That it is difficult to say, let's make it easy. Many would argue that William Ruto is one of the first ones who said, you know what, by December 31st, 2024, no African will have to get a visa to come into Kenya. Fantastic move, because what does that do? That primarily it opens up many doors. So where did we lose it? We're a continent that was one, almost homogeneous in everything that we did before 1884, when it was now separated. Or would that be the place where we started to lose it? When we said, even before we knew we were together, we were separated. But even when we had when we had carved out states, we still bore the Africanness of what we did. But then where did we lose it? And how can we get it back?
And thanks for that, because I think it's important to contextualize this without romanticizing the world before the Berlin Conference carved out Africa like a cake, just drew lines across the map. But if you look at our governance systems, then, and I think I've said this before. We had gone as Africans from that point of monolithic, God sent king or chief or whoever that knows it all. Most African communities were led by councils, and these councils, I consider them, and people argue that they were much more democratic than what we have today. In this way, when you're born in that society, there was scrutiny on you from birth, not just you, your parents, your clan, your community, people around you would be observed, such that if your uncle went and messed up somewhere, your chances of getting into leadership were next to zero. Because we'd say, if your family or clan cannot take care of itself, how can you take care of the community? And so ideally we'd have these 11 whatever number, odd number of wise people. I don't want to say men, because I think part of the history that we've lost is that a lot of the Bantu communities were actually matrilineal. It's women who are in power. And part of the reason why I hypothesize that was the case, why we had gone to that level of leadership, devolved leadership and collective leadership, is because I suspect we had experience of monolithic leadership and learned that it doesn't work, that we have to have many people in decision-making positions as Africans. And that is what was destroyed, to respond to you, was destroyed by these states that were created, some of them that split communities right in the middle. If you go to the Maasai in the Kenya-Tanzania border, the Luo, the Karamojong and the Turkana, etc., and many other communities have been split like that. So the colonialists created these states to serve their purpose. They were made for, they were for plunder. And why did the white man come out into the so-called New World? They came to make a fortune as individuals, most of them. And how did they make a fortune? They looted, they killed, they raped, they plundered. And they created a legal and economic system to support that looting and plundering. And they had to destroy then our governance systems that existed to be able to do that. I have a hypothesis that what they did, for example, if they came, let's say this is a village and you have a council in place, and this council decisions are not made by one person. So if you come here as a colonialist and you want to take over, you want to force City to go and work in your coffee farm, you have to devise a way to destroy that authority and to have one decision maker. And you find a guy called Mutemi who's been, I wish I could make it to that council, but I can't. The society has not allowed me to make it to that council. But I have illusions of grandeur. And so you enable me and you appoint me chief. And then you give me the APs. And you tell me you're in charge of this community. Make sure that these guys come to my coffee farm. And then I brutalize now the society. And it's actually, when I talk about brutalizing, I'm using words that were in the AP ordinance when it was formed. That the purpose of that police, is it the tribal police then, is to brutalize the natives into submission.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was actually on paper. You know, that's 1936 or 35 there. So the society, so we came from a society that was egalitarian. Council worked for the people. That's why we had many decision makers to have as many decisions considered as possible. And we had this, we moved into this whereby one person now makes the decision on behalf of everything. And I think that's where we went, that's where the governance system went wrong. You know, now we had, and then
then we carried on with that.
When we
into
got
the new leadership.
independence, and that's why I use independence in quotes, ideally we should have sat down and said, okay, we can't go back to 1895. But there are some things that used to work then. You found ourselves in a country called Kenya.
Yeah.
We have 44, 40, whatever number of communities. Some say 80-something, because there's been a manner of crafting of tribes that do not exist and others exist for political purposes. And there were good things around, and we had customs and good things that used to work in terms of how we organize our societies and manage and governance. What can we take from that? And what can we keep from, you know, do you want to keep this unitary state? And I think that's why part of the suggestions by the independence leaders was to do away with the borders, because the borders did not make sense. Then, if you look at what we did in 2010 with the then constitution, was actually try to go back to, if you look at the counties, they are formed around communities, so that communities can make decisions about what affects them. And I see the way forward. I suspect, I don't know what kind of courage it will take, but for the world, the unitary state is not working. Not only here in Kenya, in Africa, but also in Europe has.
I see a contradiction here, Mwalimu. So, this morning you're advocating for us going back into those, you know, smaller groupings and having those kind of decision-making organs being activated and looking at ourselves as smaller groupings and all, while at the same time, on the other side, you are co-chair of a grouping of civil society groups that are saying, let's make Africa one.
So this
so which is which? Do you want us to be smaller? Or do you want us to be big?
There's no contradiction. And actually, the same background and context that I was giving is that we were forced together. We were made Kenya by force. We did not make any choice. So it's if I retreat back into my small group and we find a way to address our issues in Kirinyaga, where I come from, and in the village that I come from, then I think we have the capacity to analyze what kind of linkages we need to make to be more effective, to have a bigger market, to be able to to build power to move things. And we were never given that choice. We've never been given that choice. I think 2010 Constitution was the first attempt at doing that, at having Kenyans share their ideas of how they want to be governed, what kind of country they imagine. But we've been trying to make Kenya work as a country, and I'm using Kenya as just part of Africa, basically, as something that was created to extract from the region towards Britain and whatever. And it did not work. It worked for the British. I don't think there's any of the African countries today that is viable. Alone. That is viable, that is meeting, if it's not, it's meeting its obligations to its people without debt, without its resources being looted. So the structure that we still
Is
have...
that because of structure or is that because of inefficiencies in the system?
The capitalist market requires consumers. And consumers is numbers. If you look at Europe, movement of...
Yeah.
Look at what Europe has
But they're
done.
small
They've removed-
countries. Many of those countries are smaller than very many of African countries.
Yeah, but
So why are they
that's
efficient?
why they've removed border control in Europe.
In terms of size, they may be smaller, but the economies are big.
They are big.
And I think if I am to extrapolate from what Malemu is saying, the size and wealth of those countries are very much a product of the extractive system that they actually had. Now, we're talking about imperialism, but if you go back to history and look at it, it's one of the where you're talking about human ingenuity, how it was crafted, how it was implemented. People assume, and you correctly put it, that at independence it came to an end. It never did, because what do you say of a country, say like Kenya, where your president is somebody who lived in the UK for 17 years? What sort of mindset do you think this person has? In many ways, he's actually detached from his country. He thinks more like the people he lived among. And look at very many of the leaders, whether it's the Francophone countries or whether it's the Anglophone countries, same thing. So the system you speak of that the British, for instance, had, the reason why those systems actually stayed was it isn't as though the black population were completely disadvantaged. There are people who benefited, blacks who benefited from that system.
The only reason why it did so well is because there was assistance from the communities that were resident on the continent.
And they benefited. That is why they themselves were the biggest resistance to the change that you might have thought of.
And CT, what you're talking about, these people you're talking about, and we can, we're talking about Africa, but let's use Kenya as the example. You talk about the first president, Jomo Kenyatta, second president, Daniel Moi, third president, Mwai Kibaki. You will find that Mwai Kibaki and Jomo Kenyatta went to the same school. They went to London School of Economics, and it was not by accident. If you look at the entire Commonwealth, the independence leaders all went, most of them, presidents or prime ministers, went to LSE. And there's a reason. It was not by accident. You look at, roads, and you talk about road scholarships.
So
who are they given to?
What sort of people are they given to?
What sort of people? The Nyaparas, the colonialists identified people within the communities who are, let's say, inclined
who
towards
had qualities that they felt yes, was amenable to their larger schemes.
And those qualities were to subjugate their own communities, ability to sell out, even sell their own mothers. And they were picked very deliberately, and then they were taken to London and schooled and sent back to the communities.
Take it further. Look at the military. What did they do? They made sure that when you're officer material, it's like a finishing school. You always went to the UK. The Royal Naval College. All the people who then rose up in leadership were people who had already been inculcated into that system.
Look at Kenya. Let's take it even further. Let's go to the corporate world.
Yes.
Look at the companies that built this country. They were all British companies.
Yes, they were.
Absolutely.
Started with British East African companies. Started with that one. Yes.
All those. The Standard Group. The original Standard newspaper.
Yes.
The Barclays banks and the Standard Chartered and all that. And they are the ones that then nurtured this clique of even corporate leaders who rose up and eventually became makers of this nation. Because they had the resources. I can mention names. I'm never afraid to mention names. The Joan Joys. They are the billionaires of... those are the guys who funded people like Mwai Kibaki when he got into politics. Who had the money? And I put it to you that, as you said, these guys never left. They just learned to get away from there, to put a veil
It took a different persona.
They
But
just
it didn't
put-
change in
yeah,
principle.
not really.
We are not independent. We are not independent.
Okay. So do we need to get independence?
Yes, we do.
From what?
From
What? Let's take
the
a break.
extractive
Think about it
colonial
and then you
states.
tell us how we get there. 25 minutes to 10. Mwalimu Mutemi Wakema is a community organizer for Kongamano la Mapinduzi, and he's talking about that. Mapinduzi is revolution.
Yes.
Yes.
Kongamano la
It's a
revolution.
Congress for the revolution that we need. That's that independence that we need.
Bas. So yeah, we've looked at this is the system that we adopted. This is the system that we have had in place, and looking at our leadership. Why do you say it has largely failed?
So, if you created the state to extract, remember there's something we keep laughing about when former President Uhuru said, "Munataka nifanye nini?" But for me, that was the best example of the disconnect between the citizen and the leadership in this way. So we know that at independence, and again flag independence, and I'm using that, the people who went and fought for independence, and it's not just the Mau Mau, across this country, across this continent, a lot of them never ended up in power. Because to run the colonial extractive state, you needed a certain kind of person who had been educated in a certain way. And the people who had that skill set were the sons and daughters of the colonial chiefs. So the people who took over political power at independence were actually the ones we wanted out. And we've been fighting with that for the last 60 years. Because these people had only, their world view is that one of individuals, monolithics, making decisions on behalf of communities. And they are the bearers of knowledge and skill sets and all that. And that the rest, if you look at our education system, were either to be clerks or fundis or carpenters or whatever, and they should not come to the place where decisions are made. And since the Mzungu had created this state that the more you extracted, the more resources you got, the more capital money you got, then that happened to be the criteria for you being a leader. If you look at MCAs or MPs or presidents and that kind of thing across the continent, the first thing they do is accumulate money.
Yes, wealth.
Through extraction. And then seek power. And that power is usually to protect or to perpetuate that extraction. So you have multi-billionaires in terms of dollar billionaires who are still looking for extracting more. Because that is the nature of the colonial extractive state. The state was created to extract. So when Mutemi the clerk takes a bribe from Eric to fast track some process, and you pay me 2,500 for that to smoothen the
Process.
thing, and I'm found, I'll be arrested and jailed for 20 years or fined some crazy amount that I cannot. Why? Because you have bribed me. So they call that corruption. But when you're the MP of ODM and you've looted 700 million from the state, from the public, you are rewarded. You can even be jailed by the courts because you're trying to reform. But the leader of ODM will actually come and write a letter for you to be exempted from serving jail. Because you've proven to be a good extractor. And if you look around, all over the wash people we talk about, the people in power, the people who have risen to be governor of Nairobi, governor of Mombasa, governor of Kiambu, who are they? What's their character?
Okay, so then, Mwalimu, based on what you're saying now, essentially, because we keep asking, what is the problem, isn't it? We keep saying, if this was the case and that colonialism ended at some point, quote unquote ended, because then we still have concepts like neo-colonialism, and then why can we really not get away from the shackles of this thing? What you're saying essentially is that the individuals have been pre-picked, and it cannot but keep going down in that lineage. That you will always only have a certain number of people who are in positions of leadership. You only then have a certain kind of people who continually rise in the ranks. In speak here, it would be called dynasty kind of thing. They've already been pre-picked, and so you cannot, from what you're saying, break away from this thing because it's going to be passed down in the lineage, quote unquote.
What is a dynasty?
Isn't it? And that because I keep asking the question.
Yeah, we are talking about gatekeeping. That's
Right.
what a dynasty is.
Yeah.
And it's in
Protecting the crown, as it were.
Look at the church, look at the corporate world, look at our political. They are gatekeepers, and the system is very good at producing gatekeepers. And there are rules of engagement. For example, joining certain clubs. If you're not a member of that club, you can never get a certain tender in government. That's gatekeeping. And you have schools that then create those systems and channel people into spaces, into the corporate world. Right now, and this system has never died. Let me give you a practical example. The Yali. Who does Yali identify and bring into their network across
young, promising, industrious
Africans
Yes.
who are in the civil society space, in the corporate space, media,
across the board.
What do? They take them and inculcate certain culture, certain values and
Ideals of leadership and good governance.
that serve what?
Good governance. and
No, they
leadership
serve.
for the people.
Who's paying for this?
The state.
America. Why? Because
Okay.
remember what Siti was
Mutemi.
talking earlier.
But I hear you, but I'm hearing the areas where you're saying something that makes sense. Others, I hear you just going completely
No.
onto a conspiracy.
Let's try.
I asked
It's
you-
not a conspiracy.
So-
actually.
so-
Remember what Siti was talking about.
So
The people who are taken
what
to
we've
the
said
UK.
is okay. We have an extractive system that's been there. It was organized, and this and the other. We have a system that's not serving us. Okay, so what would be the way forward? I asked you then. If we have not gained independence, do we need to gain independence? And independence from what and in what form and shape? What's the way forward? Now, take us to the future.
Actually, this conversation is part of that. We need, first of all, remember when you're
understand what's happening.
thinking about, think out of the box. You have to see yourself, and which is the hardest thing that we face in that straitjacket that we've been put in. So that you can then think, how do we get it? The question you're asking, how do we get out of this? Okay? And as I said earlier, part of it, the 2010 Constitution, was actually a very visionary beginning to do that. And that's why I said we have to learn to manage ourselves and our communities and our small communities with those values that used to work then. And then say, okay, do we stay as Kenya or do we stay as East Africa? And you see attempts of it when there's a reason why the East Africa community exists.
Yeah.
And they are very intelligent people who identify that. But unfortunately, they just think about the market. If you look at Vision 2030, the original Vision 2030, we had three pillars. We had the political, we had the economic, and the social pillar. And I put it to you, Eric, that the social is the software. The rest are hardware. And what we've not been working on is the software. How do we build a nation?
So what should we do?
We need
Again,
to start that conversation.
Kongamano Lama. You see, when the freedom fighters were fighting, they were painting the picture of what freedom would look like. All right? You don't have access to your piece of land. You will have access to your piece of land. It was a very clear message. We will get our land back. We will be able to plant what we want, when we want, however we want. We'll be able to do this and the other. Okay? When you're saying about the fathers of independence across the continent, you've talked about some of those that had visionary leadership. They were painting a picture. Now, you are the modern day independence fighter. Paint for me the picture of this independence. It's okay. The colonizer has come, he's taken my land, it's okay. The colonizer has put me in a concentration camp and taken me to a village and called this a reserve and banned me from going to the city. Okay, show me the alternative. What is it? And how do I go there?
Thank you. That's a very good question. The alternative, for example, you talk about like the vision that Malema painted, is any African should be able to dream, and especially in this very modern connected world, and be facilitated towards achieving their dreams. Whether it's in business, whether it's in arts, cultural, whatever, farming, etc., etc. And we know we have papers and policy papers that have been developed across the continent in this country of where we need to go that have not been implemented. So we're not talking about...
We're not devoid of dreams.
Or we're not even talking about reinventing the wheel. There's a story, I don't know whether we spoke about it here. The former fisheries minister during the Kibaki government, Otuoma, the Grand Coalition government, Otuoma, when the government decided to take fish beyond the lake and the ocean because it's good for you, and so it was even brought to our place in the Mulima where we think fish is a snake.
Yes, you do.
You know, he went for benchmarking in Israel. And spent, I don't know, a few weeks there with his team. And then he told his story at the Grand Regency. We had a civil society meeting, and he was a guest of honor. And he was talking about how embarrassed he was at the end of the tour, the benchmarking. And they are saying, those platitudes and whatever, finishing, and they are in the office of the Israeli minister for, I think, whatever
fisheries,
and asks. Like, how did you guys get here? And this guy goes to the shelf and brings him a document, which is a Kenya master plan for fish, whatever, 1974. Or 75. So you can imagine how embarrassed he was. He's traveled all that, spent 3 weeks in Israel with, the whatever budget. And then this document, I'm sure, existed here, even in his ministry, had he asked around. So we're not devoid of dreams, and we don't need to start anywhere but implement all these ideas, brilliant ideas. If you read any of the speeches that our president speaks, you will see that those visions are there.
But let me ask you something. At what point did we stop having visionaries? What happened to them?
We have visionaries.
No, we don't.
We do.
No, we don't.
If you read...
A daydreamer is not necessarily a visionary.
Remember how our president was trending across Africa early this year? Why? Because he spoke what Africans wanted to hear.
That isn't being visionary.
No, it's not him. Not him. There is a guy who wrote that speech. I suspect it's Eric Ngeno. So the people around the president they know where the Africa needs to go.
Muteme, my point exactly, they actually don't know where the Africa needs to go. And I'll tell you why. You seem to have hit the nail on the head when you talk about, say, our county system. See, if you have a community that is cohesive, and you have many of them that are cohesive, it makes the bigger unit stronger. If you look at the system that they have in the US of these states, where you actually have states that have economies that are even larger than the continent of Africa. It's a state.
Texas, California.
Yes, it's a state. But then there's the whole country. That configuration, that country is big because those units are able to do what they are doing, and they are good at it, and they are big at it. So the country is big. India has understood this. They probably understood long before. Why is India so big? Why is China doing what they're doing? You see, when I talk about visionaries, China isn't where it is because by perchance. They are visionaries. And the baton was passed on. One leader leaves it, takes it on to the other. You talk about the 30-year plan. That's vision. And it's concretized step by step by step. Platitudes about what Africa should be. We all know those things. And we all say that thing, throwing Ubuntu inside that so that we can just feel that it's really African. But that isn't a vision. A vision is when you have this picture of the future, but you inculcate in it the very nitty-gritty steps that you need to take to get there. Where are they?
So, it's good that you mentioned China.
Sound like one of them, City. You're saying they don't exist.
Yeah, you're speaking that vision, and it's being able also to articulate and carry people and people along. And it's good you've talked about China, but what is it about or Singapore or China? You know, we're talking about Singapore. I call it arrested development. If you look, I think the most democratic political organization on this planet today is the Chinese Communist Party. The meritocracy to rise within that party, to become the president you see. You have to go through the ranks from below, have work, prove yourself. Eventually, by the time you get to the Politburo, you've run...
You're a first among equals. Yes.
And you've run...
Yes, you have.
Run what you'd call a province and shown the productivity.
Yes.
So there's a record.
You have a track record that people
Today,
can follow.
Your house help, CT, has a CV about what her qualifications or his qualification that aligns to the work that you're giving them more than our politicians in Kenya, the ones we vote into power. You get someone who has never run a kiosk and you make them president, who have never run anything.
You're calling it arrested development. I'm calling it a poverty of spirit. Because what is it about leadership that makes it possible for other people to follow you?
And that's why it's important to go back to the colonial extractive state and who rose into leadership, what character of person rose into leadership. Because as Eric keeps asking, what next? What way forward? We have to go back and look at that.
Mutemi, don't you think we need to understand the mindset of the colonialist? You see, when people think imperialist, they think of the West. No. There are leaders who have existed on this planet who are imperialists. This guy called Genghis Khan, that guy was an imperialist. Okay? If you're talking about Karl Marx, that was an imperialist. If you're talking about Roosevelt, that was an imperialist. See, the mindset that understands, because these people are in many ways visionaries. They envision something that will benefit them, and then they have the steps to getting it. Now, they may wreak havoc, but they had a plan. Now, when you talk about a country like ours, and we talk about our county systems, okay? We talk about the Kivuta Kibwanas. Fortunately, it's just one, okay? You say visionary. You talk about Mvuria in Kwale. These are human beings, and they do have feet of clay. But you see what they have done. They've moved that geographical space of theirs a step where it wasn't before. And how do you know this? Because you compare them to their neighbors. Some are not, they're not sitting still, they're receding. And why we can measure is because we know the amount of monies that go into these economies. And yet, when we look, you really don't see anything commensurate with what it is.
So we have visionaries.
And you know what? Where the disconnect is that those leaders, the Kivuta Kibwanas, the Oparanyas, the Muvulias, who we know have run their counties well and improved the lives of the people there,
significantly,
the Kenyans were there, are not even being considered to be the next presidents of this country. What is that broken system? Why can't we now have that conversation?
Why can't we now?
Because they have a CV. They have a CV.
And a very good one too.
And a
because
very good
if we
CV.
truly say that we're trying to get from one point to another in terms of development, and you can see an example of somebody who's been able to do one.
You can see it.
Why
with
can't
minimum with very meager resources, by the way.
Why
And you can
can
see.
we not make the connect? And that's my question.
Let me guess. Someone is going to say that it's because the system of imperialists does not want them to thrive.
Of course, because and this is it. The fact that Africa has resources, and now the resources are not just about the minerals. Yeah, even the youngest upward mobile population,
Yes.
as a resource, means that you can hear about Africa rising. As you're talking about Africans, the people rising, not Africa, because Africa is not just a continent; it's the people. So we have the human development. We have to figure out how to mainstream these people who are already there and they have the CV of working for the people
Sawa.
into the leadership of our countries.
Mutemi, next time you come, tell us now how we get into this revolutionary. Sawa, the revolution.
Thank you.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.